My family cut me off because my happy relationship upset my sister, then skipped my wedding when I refused to hide it. Dating disasters, huh? My family banned me from events and then skipped my wedding because I wouldn't hide my partner. I never thought my happiness could be an issue, but I was wrong. It all started last spring when I brought Delpha to my dad's birthday. I should have seen the warnings, but I was too happy to notice. Delpha and I had been together for 8 months, and things were amazing. It felt natural, easy, like we just fit. He made me laugh daily, listened when I talked, and never made me feel too much, or not enough. We'd talk for hours. Even quiet moments were comfortable. I looked forward to seeing him every day. So, for my dad's 55th birthday, I was excited to introduce Delpha to more family. He'd already charmed my mom and stepdad weeks earlier. My mom kept texting about how polite and funny he was, and my stepdad even invited him fishing. But my dad's side was different. Drama always flared, usually because of my half-sister, Rebecca, 28, but acting 16. Rebecca constantly fell for the wrong guys. Married coworkers, guys living with exes, even one who borrowed money and disappeared. Each time, she'd call my dad and stepmom crying. They'd rush over with ice cream, tissues, and reassurances it wasn't her fault, just bad luck. They'd analyze every detail and badmouth the guys, saying Rebecca deserved better. The problem was Rebecca never learned. My dad and stepmom always swooped in, fixing everything instead of letting her face consequences. They'd pay her rent, co-sign loans, even let her move back home, which happened twice a year. So, walking into dinner with Delpha, genuinely happy, I thought everyone would be glad to see me doing well. I'd had my own relationship disasters in my early 20s and spent time working on myself before Delpha. I figured my family would be excited I'd found someone who treated me right. But the atmosphere felt weird. Everyone was polite, asking Delpha normal questions about his job, background, and how we met. Delpha was charming, telling funny stories, and asking thoughtful questions. My dad clearly liked him, despite trying to play it cool. Rebecca was there, having just been dumped by a dating app guy who lied about everything. She'd been texting me all week about the nightmare, saying she might just get cats and give up on dating. I'd tried to be supportive, but honestly, I was tired of the same conversation. She kept getting involved with problematic guys and acting shocked. I never said it directly, but I thought she needed a break to figure out why she kept repeating mistakes. Rebecca sat across from me, miserable, picking at her food. I felt bad. Breakups suck, even when predictable. Then Delpha told a story about a determined elderly patient. I was laughing, enjoying his storytelling. That's when my stepmom Karen commented, "It must be nice to be so carefree and happy all the time." Her tone made me look up. She was staring at me, her expression unreadable, not friendly. I saw Rebecca had tears in her eyes, staring at her plate. I felt awful, realizing my happiness might be hard for Rebecca. I tried to change the subject, asking about her new job, but she just shrugged. Dinner became awkward, full of silences and forced conversation. I kept catching Karen and my dad exchanging glances. Delpha and I left as soon as we could. On the drive home, he asked if everything was okay. I told him about Rebecca's breakup and thought I'd been insensitive. Delpha understood but said I shouldn't have to hide my good relationship to make others feel better. The next morning, Karen texted asking to talk. I called, expecting to clear the air. Instead, she lectured me about being insensitive, flaunting my relationship in front of struggling Rebecca. I was confused. I was just being myself. But she insisted bringing Delpha, talking about our relationship, and looking happy was hurtful to Rebecca. She said I needed to be more considerate. I asked what she wanted. She suggested toning down affection, avoiding talking about Delpha around Rebecca, and focusing more on supporting Rebecca. I pointed out I'd always supported Rebecca, listening countless times without making it about me. But Karen insisted this was different. Rebecca needed extra support now, and it would help if I was more sensitive. I said I'd try to be more aware, but hiding my happiness wasn't fair. That conversation bothered me for days. Something felt off with Karen's logic. Delpha said they were asking me to shrink myself for Rebecca's issues, which wasn't healthy. But I didn't want family problems, So I tried to be low-key with my relationship, even though it felt fake. At my cousin's graduation party weeks later, I went alone because Delpha was working. Still, Karen and my dad gave me odd looks when I smiled or laughed. Rebecca was there with a new guy who turned out to be condescending. I watched her hang on his every word, even as he was rude to others. My dad and Karen exchanged worried glances, but said nothing to Rebecca. Later, Karen pulled me aside. She'd noticed I seemed more relaxed and pleasant without Delpha. She suggested I come to family events solo for a while, until Rebecca got more settled. I was stunned. That wasn't our agreement. She insisted his presence seemed to make things harder for Rebecca, and it was temporary. I said absolutely not. Delpha was my partner. I wouldn't treat him like a secret. Karen got defensive, calling me selfish, putting my desires ahead of my sister's well-being. She said if I really cared about Rebecca, I'd make this small sacrifice. But it didn't feel small. I told Karen that Rebecca, at 28, needed to deal with her own problems. Karen called me cruel and unsympathetic, insisting Rebecca needed support, not judgment. I countered that Rebecca struggled because my dad and Karen never let her face consequences. Rescuing her wasn't helping her grow. Karen called that horrible and couldn't believe I was cold and selfish. The argument escalated. Karen accused me of jealousy. I pointed out I was trying to live an independent life, not constantly create drama. We were both angry. Karen said I needed to think about what kind of sister and daughter I wanted to be, and I was welcome back when I was more supportive and less self-centered. I left feeling terrible. How did wanting to bring my boyfriend make me selfish? I'd been endlessly patient with Rebecca's drama. When I told Delpha, he was furious. He called my family unreasonable and manipulative. He said they had an unhealthy dynamic where Rebecca was the center of attention, and anyone not participating was seen as unsupportive. It wasn't fair to me. I didn't hear from my dad or Karen for 2 weeks. I waited for an apology or compromise, but my phone stayed silent, except for Rebecca's complaints about her new boyfriend. Finally, my dad called. He agreed with Karen. I'd been insensitive. He said until I was more considerate and supportive of the family, it was better if I didn't attend gatherings. My attitude was creating tension. I asked if he was seriously banning me for being too happy. He denied it, saying my behavior had been selfish and hurtful, and actions have consequences. I said, fine. If that's how he felt, I'd respect his wishes and stay away, but he was making a huge mistake, prioritizing Rebecca's inability to cope over his relationship with me. He said if I was stubborn and refused to see my actions' impact, distance would help me gain perspective. I said maybe he was right about the distance. I was tired of being guilt-tripped for having a healthy relationship while they enabled Rebecca's dysfunction. I hung up and cried for 20 minutes. My own father was essentially exiling me because I wouldn't pretend to be miserable to make my sister feel better. It felt like a bizarro world where happiness was a flaw, and drama was rewarded. Delpha found me. One look, and he hugged me. He listened as I cried. He said my family was toxic, that I deserved better than to be treated like my happiness was a burden. Maybe this forced break was good. It would give me space to see how messed up the dynamic was. I thought he might be right. I realized my dad and Karen always treated Rebecca as fragile, needing protection, while expecting me to be independent. When I had troubles, they'd listen briefly, then change the subject. With Rebecca, they spent hours analyzing and planning. Over the next few weeks, I actually enjoyed the break from family drama. No eggshells around Rebecca, no monitoring my happiness. Delpha and I went to concerts, tried new restaurants, took weekend trips, all without considering Rebecca's feelings. It was refreshing to just exist without self-doubt. My mom noticed I seemed more relaxed. When I told her what happened, she was appalled. She called it emotional manipulation. Healthy families celebrate successes, not treat them as threats. She pointed out Rebecca, almost 30, had been creating the same drama for a decade. It was time for her to take responsibility. My mom had seen this dynamic for years, worried my dad and Karen were harming Rebecca by never letting her face consequences. Meanwhile, Rebecca kept texting complaints about her new boyfriend. Financially irresponsible, had a temper, making her uncomfortable. It was so obvious he was another loser. But if I pointed that out, she'd get defensive. So I just sent generic responses like, "That sounds hard, and you deserve better." About 8 months after the wedding, Delpha and I were at dinner. He got serious and pulled out a ring. He asked me to marry him. I said yes before he finished. Being with Delpha taught me what it felt like to be truly seen, valued, supported. The ring was perfect. We talked about our future, a house, trips, the life we'd build. Everything felt possible. We didn't want a long engagement, just a small, intimate wedding. That night, I mentally listed who to call. My dad and Karen weren't on it. Telling them filled me with dread, not excitement. I knew they'd make it about Rebecca, or lecture me about fixing our relationship first. I called my mom first. She screamed with joy, crying happy tears, asking to see the ring. She knew Delpha was the one. Then my best friend who introduced us. She'd been waiting for months. We talked wedding plans. She offered to be maid of honor, which made me cry with gratitude for genuinely excited people in my life. But calling my dad kept getting postponed. I knew announcing my engagement would somehow become about being inconsiderate to Rebecca, or how I should have waited, or how I was selfish. Delpha finally asked why I was stressed. I explained my worry about him and Karen. Delpha said their opinion didn't matter. If they couldn't be happy, it was their problem. He was right, but it still felt awful. I'd hoped the engagement might fix our relationship, snap him out of his mindset. But when I finally called days later, it went badly. He congratulated me flatly, then immediately grilled me about the timeline and cost, like a job interview. When I mentioned a small fall ceremony, he said it sounded nice, but hoped I understood. The situation with our family was still unresolved. It might be awkward. I asked what he meant. Karen was still upset. Rebecca was having another hard time. Maybe we should wait until things were more settled. I couldn't believe he suggested postponing my wedding because Rebecca broke up with another loser. I said Delpha and I weren't putting our lives on hold. If he and Karen couldn't be supportive, maybe they shouldn't come. He got defensive, saying timing mattered. I said the only issue was his refusal to treat me with the same support he gave Rebecca. If he'd miss my wedding over that, it spoke volumes about his priorities. He called me dramatic. I pointed out I was the only one asked to compromise. He said if that's how I felt, maybe it would be better if we all took more time to cool off. I hung up, feeling awful. My own father was telling me my engagement was an inconvenience. Delpha found me crying. He held me and said we'd have the most beautiful wedding with people who truly loved us. Anyone who couldn't celebrate didn't deserve to be there. Over the next few weeks, planning with my mom and friends was amazing. It was so much easier not accommodating people who didn't want to be there. We found a perfect winery, planned an intimate ceremony. I kept hoping my dad would call, apologize, ask to be involved. But my phone stayed quiet, except for Rebecca's texts about new crises, now obsessing over a gym guy who barely noticed her. It was so predictable and frustrating that I just deleted her texts. I was tired of giving emotional support while getting none for my own positive life events. As the wedding neared, I made the tough choice to send invitations to my dad and Karen. Part of me still hoped they'd come to their senses. But when I called, my dad said they'd discussed it and didn't think it was appropriate to attend. I asked if he was seriously skipping his own daughter's wedding because I wouldn't hide my happiness for Rebecca. He denied it, saying unresolved issues needed addressing. I said the only issue was his refusal to treat me with the same consideration he gave Rebecca. If he'd miss my wedding over that, it said everything. He called me dramatic, saying if I apologized and committed to supporting Rebecca, we could fix things. I said I had nothing to apologize for. I wouldn't beg him to care about my happiness when Rebecca's feelings were clearly more important. The conversation ended with him hoping I'd reconsider my attitude and that the door was always open if I wanted to make things right. I said, I guessed we just had to agree to disagree, and I hoped he'd be happy explaining his absence. Delpha said my dad was manipulative and abusive, that I deserved better. Our wedding would be perfect, filled with people who loved us, genuinely wanting our happiness. He was right. Our wedding was the most beautiful, joyful day. My mom walked me down the aisle, looking so proud. The ceremony was intimate, heartfelt. My mom gave an amazing speech about me deserving to be cherished. My best friend talked about how perfect we were. The whole day was a celebration of love, commitment, and support. No drama, no demands. But the aftermath brought new family drama. A few days after our honeymoon, Karen sent angry texts. She felt hurt and betrayed. We went ahead without them. She couldn't believe I'd destroy our family over a minor disagreement. Rebecca was devastated by wedding photos. It was cruel to flaunt my happiness. I was amazed she was still making it about Rebecca. I replied I hadn't destroyed anything. I'd simply stopped letting my happiness be held hostage. If they were devastated, they should have made different choices. I invited them. They chose not to come. Karen wrote back that I'd changed, become selfish and cold. The old me would never have prioritized my desires over my family's needs. She was disappointed. Rebecca looked up to me, but now felt rejected and abandoned. I needed to take responsibility for the pain I'd caused. I realized Karen was in an alternate reality where I should be grateful for second-class treatment, where boundaries were selfish. She genuinely believed I should have sacrificed my wedding for Rebecca's emotional issues. I didn't respond. I blocked her number and focused on my marriage. My dad called weeks later. I thought he'd apologize. Instead, he lectured me again about my unacceptable behavior since the wedding. I needed to make amends to Karen and Rebecca. Family was most important. My willingness to cut them off showed I'd lost sight. I asked if he truly thought family was most important, why he'd missed my wedding rather than admit unfairness. I'd always put family first, but it had to be mutual. I wouldn't sacrifice my well-being for people who didn't value me. He called me dramatic, said nobody asked me to sacrifice, but sometimes family meant putting others' needs first. My refusal to do that when Rebecca needed support showed I was selfish and immature. I said I'd been putting others' needs first. For years. The one time I asked for basic respect, I was unreasonable. The argument circled. Finally, I told him I loved him, but I wouldn't keep arguing. If he wanted a relationship, he had to accept I was an adult deserving respect. He hoped I'd come to my senses, waiting for my apology. I said I wasn't throwing anything away. I was done accepting crumbs when I deserved a seat at the table. If he was waiting for an apology for wanting to be happy, he'd wait a long time. Delpha said he was proud of me. He'd watched me struggle with this toxic dynamic, not knowing how to help me see I deserved better. People who truly loved me would never ask me to shrink myself or hide my happiness. Anyone who couldn't celebrate my successes wasn't really family. Over the next few months, I got updates on Rebecca. The pattern continued. She got involved with the gym guy, married, then an older divorced man with lots of baggage. Each disaster followed the script. Crying calls to my dad and Karen, them rushing to comfort her. My cousin said my dad was paying Rebecca's rent because she was overwhelmed and couldn't focus at work. Meanwhile, Delpha and I settled wonderfully into married life. Every day, I was grateful I chose my own happiness over enabling dysfunction. We bought a house, adopted a rescue dog. About 8 months after the wedding, my dad called me at work. His tone was serious. Rebecca was hospitalized after a suicide attempt. She'd left a note saying she couldn't handle feeling like a failure compared to everyone else, tired of being the family disappointment while I had a perfect life. I felt like I'd been hit by a truck. I never wanted this. The idea that she might have hurt herself because of me was devastating. I asked if she was okay, where she was. He said stable, at a hospital, and she specifically asked for me. Maybe this crisis could heal our family. I said of course I'd come. Driving there, I felt dread. My dad's tone felt manipulative. At the hospital, my dad and Karen looked haggard. Karen cried, glad I came. My dad hugged me, hoping good could come from this. I asked to see Rebecca. In her room, she looked pale. She cried, apologizing for everything. She'd been so jealous of my happiness, made herself sick competing. Watching me marry Delpha made her realize how empty her life was. Every relationship made her feel worse. The night she took the pills, she was looking at our wedding photos, feeling she'd never be good enough. I felt terrible. I never wanted my happiness to cause pain. I told her her worth wasn't about relationships. She deserved happiness. I was sorry she struggled, wished she'd talked to me. But then she said something chilling. My dad and Karen told her I called her pathetic, said she'd never find anyone, because she was too needy, that I laughed about her problems with Delpha. I was shocked. I'd never said anything like that. The idea my dad and Karen would lie so cruelly was unbelievable. I told Rebecca I never said those things. Whoever told her was lying. She looked confused. Karen seemed so sure. She felt it was true because I seemed happy, and she was miserable. I said my happiness had nothing to do with her struggles. Comparing us wasn't fair. I spent an hour with Rebecca, helping her see her worth wasn't tied to relationship status. She seemed more stable by the time I left. Grateful I came, hoping to rebuild our relationship. But back in the waiting room, I was livid. I confronted Karen about the lies. She got defensive, denied it, said Rebecca misunderstood. I said Rebecca was specific. Someone deliberately fed her false info to turn her against me. Karen called me paranoid. My dad jumped in, saying this wasn't the time for accusations. I said I supported Rebecca, but I wouldn't stand by while someone lied to manipulate her. The argument escalated. My dad finally said if I couldn't be supportive, I should leave. I said I was supportive, but wouldn't let anyone use her vulnerability to lie or manipulate. I left the hospital feeling like I'd been through a meat grinder. It felt like a setup to make me the bad guy, to drag me back into their dysfunction. They'd used Rebecca's crisis to guilt me. I felt sick. When I told Delpha, he was furious. Using a suicide attempt to manipulate family was disgusting. Even if Rebecca's crisis was genuine, my dad and Karen's handling was abusive. I shouldn't feel guilty. Over the next few days, my dad called several times, asking me back to the hospital. But Karen was always there, making passive-aggressive comments. After a week, I told my dad I'd support Rebecca, but I wouldn't pretend family problems were my fault. Using her crisis to manipulate me into blame made things worse. He denied manipulation, saying if I cared, I'd take responsibility. I said I cared deeply, but I wasn't responsible for her mental health. That was unfair. Rebecca was released, with a therapy plan. I checked in regularly, but I maintained boundaries with my dad and Karen. They were still trying to guilt me. Finally, I had enough. I told him I'd tried for months, supported Rebecca, even after their manipulation. But I was done being the scapegoat. He called me dramatic, said family was more important than pride. I'd regret walking away. I said my only regret was wasting time trying to maintain relationships with people who saw me as the villain. I was ready to accept some people never change. That was our last conversation, over a year ago. Rebecca and I text occasionally. She's doing much better with therapy, setting boundaries with my dad and Karen, gaining independence.